Hi, and welcome back. Looking at the history of the development of labor relations in the United States, we're going to break this up into two parts. It's chapter 3 in the book, and the first will take it up to the New Deal era with Roosevelt, and then the second, next week, we'll take it from there up to current time. We break it up into two sections primarily because that is the defining line. Prior to the New Deal, you had a fairly violent development in terms of the relationship of workers, employees, and unions, and workers fighting for their right to organize and to try to influence terms and conditions of employment. So you had a very violent set of actions by the employees and their unions with an equally violent reaction by their employers, supported by the government in use of force and use of law to try to put down the unionization, if you will, going on at the time. The dividing line becomes the New Deal for a lot of different reasons. There were certainly some acts prior to that. The Clayton Act in 1914, which prohibited the use of injunctions to stop labor movements. But primarily what developed is the population as a whole simply got fed up with the violence that was going on, and the government felt the need to step in. Also remember, the New Deal is the early 1930s. You're coming into coming off of the Depression, actually, and the government's looking for ways to boost the economy, to develop jobs, and so there were a lot of public works projects going on, and you needed labor rest in order to do this. So there was the development of a national labor policy that basically said it is the policy of the United States and the United States government that employees have the right to organize, have the right to peacefully engage their employers in collective bargaining. So that's the dichotomy. As we look at the development leading up to the New Deal era, recognize the sociological changes that have been taking place. With pre-revolution United States and all the way up through the Civil War, you were primarily talking about a rural America. You had tradespeople, you had farmers, you had tenant farmers, you had a few hired hands who were basically individuals working for the employer, and the employer pretty much did whatever they wanted to in small settings, but everything was communal-based, community-based. It wasn't until the development of the railroad that you started having things made in one place being shipped in quantity somewhere else so that you could have a factory located near the railroad head where you could hire 20, 30, 40, or 100 employees and start having this mass grouping that you started seeing the efforts by employees to organize. So basically things were pretty much individualized, and you didn't have that collective action that was taking place. Keep in mind that primarily employers, in order to increase profit and maintain profitability, have to control costs. They can't do that to a large extent on the raw materials that they buy, particularly pre-industrial revolution, because they were pretty limited in where they could get their goods. So the only thing you can control are your labor costs, so wages would be kept low. At the same time, there's a whole sociological structure going on in the United States where you don't have a middle class. You have the wealthy, the landowners, the business people, and you have everybody else, the farmers, the workers, and that was it. And it was recognized that this was the social structure. It's not until you start getting into the mid to late 1800s that you see a sociological movement taking place where you see people saying workers deserve better, people deserve better, that we need to educate the population, that we need to be careful about child labor. And that represents really the beginning of the labor movement. As you go through the history in Chapter 3, you will notice that many of the first labor movements, WWW, the Knights of Labor, all these other groups, looked at it in terms of we need to better society. We need to educate people, not let's have less hours, more money, better benefits. So as this sociological change takes place with the Industrial Revolution, with the ability to transfer goods over long distances, now you're going to start seeing the development of a concerted effort by groups to organize, to get groups of employees, because let's face it, if one employee goes to an employer and says, I need more money, they can say no, or they could just fire you. If you get all of the employees together going to the employer, now that employer has to think about, well, what if they walk off the job? What if they quit? What if they don't want to continue? I don't have a place of business anymore. Now they're going to have to start listening. And that's the whole theory behind labor organizing. So we'll break this up into two parts. Once we hit the Industrial Revolution, you'll see how things develop more quickly. And then, of course, after the New Deal, you start seeing, as a matter of law, the policy of the government being that employees have the right to organize, and therefore we have to have an orderly process. And then we'll go into the law itself.